Okay. Hey, you guys. Thanks for coming over. This is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio, and this is Lost Arts Radio Live, a special extra show we do for just about an hour a week to look back at some of the things that are happening in the outside world around us and major news events, interesting things that have implications for our lives. And who I am, I'm just the host of Lost Arts Radio and a experimental research scientist that's been focused on study on aging and health and consciousness issues that tie in together with it. And I started doing that in about 1965. And, when I was originally doing that, the general attitude, the scientific exploration of things involves questioning everything, even supposedly established facts that you're not supposed to question. And then that took me into about a 20-year investigation of what's going on in the outside world, particularly in the activities of the global rulers and the power structure that's been in charge of most of the world for a long time. And I started questioning everything I saw in that and digging into it deeper and deeper, and finally found out really how their pyramid-shaped power structure operates, what they intend to do, what they're doing to us now, how all the different agendas or pieces of the agenda fit together, like the geoengineering and the injections. I'm not going to say the V word and get banned off the internet today, but you know what I'm talking about, injecting poison into people to make them supposedly immune to disease, which is not true. And I started finding out all kinds of interesting stuff and how all these agendas like toxic agriculture and drug-based medicine and fake education and news and science and all this stuff, how it all fits together. And I was doing all my work very quietly because I really preferred not to get assassinated right away, and they were already killing a lot of doctors who got into even a fraction of the things that we put together. But then I was asked to start a radio show, which would not have been even possible. I didn't have the technical background, but Doug Diamond showed up at exactly the right time to make it all possible, and that's still the case. He's supporting the whole show right now behind the scenes, and so that's why I'm here. And it was actually his idea to come up with a little summary type news show, even for an hour a week at the end of each week, not to try to be comprehensive in the news coverage, because for that, there's a lot of great real news independent broadcasters who are in the field investigating and everything, stuff I don't have time to do. But the best comprehensive news coverage that I've found to date that goes everywhere and has like 100 employees working on it, not supporting any particular big investor or any. There aren't any big investors. It was something that this news broadcaster started from scratch, and even he's good because just saying his name now, which I'm obviously avoiding, can get you banned off the internet permanently, or at least off the major social media platforms. But his initials are AJ. You might have guessed that. And I still recommend, as long as it's possible, to watch him. Now, he's been banned off almost all the major channels, or platforms, I should say. But he's available on BitChute. Go to, particularly on a guy's channel who is also banned off the major social media networks. His first name is Ron, and his last name, I separate that a little bit for the benefit of AI, who is not quite bright enough to put two and two together yet, but they will be soon. And his last name is Gibson, and he's on BitChute. Look for his channel, and it's a great way to keep up with this newscaster whose initials are AJ. And it's still there, and his audience is bigger than ever because of the censorship. So about 5 years ago, when we started doing this above the radar, you might say, and visible worldwide, I decided, well, sure, we're all getting some kind of protection, or we wouldn't even be here now. So we'll do the best we can. I just, on this news show, because of what's going on in the U.S. and other places with censorship, I realized I had to at least watch it a little bit with keywords, and maybe we'd last longer. When we do get banned, which is pretty inevitable at some point, then find us at real.video, which is becoming brighteon.com, and that's BRIGHTEON, like bright eon or bright age.com. started by our good friend Mike, and he's also banned off everything. So he's got government approval as well. His last name is Adams, and he started this gigantic operation that's been wonderful in getting out real health information, and more lately, real information on world situations. Really educational. First name of that operation is Natural, and the second part of the name is News. And you can go look up that primary website. There's about 300 others that it leads to, and you can find that on any good browser. I'm not going to say to Google it, because you should be forgetting about Google it completely right now. Never use them, and it's just my advice if you want to follow it, because it's the most invasive, surveillance-oriented, now totally fake search engine that is being used to shape political views and worldviews, and it's completely in line with the criminal major corporate media of the United States and elsewhere. And in the U.S., that media, the primary, what they call mainstream corporate media, which is completely dishonest. Almost everything they talk about is untrue the way they present it. They're owned by about 3 or 4 major global corporations, and they are the mouthpiece of those corporations. So they don't really have any obligation whatsoever to tell the truth. Their job is to say in a very authoritative manner, with the right appearance, and really a lot fancier than me, obviously, and they have a real studio for one thing, and they're actors. The news anchors are actors on those channels, and their purpose is to make you believe a certain thing because it comes across as in exactly the right tone of voice and all that, propaganda-wise. But just the opposite of the news outlets that I just described to you. So watching what they're doing and what all their allies in the different corporations are doing, the censorship is ramping up. Things are getting really intense right now. None of it is accurately portrayed on the mainstream news. So you have to do your own research. And, a lot of what I tell you about in this fast-paced hour that we go through in about 5 minutes, it feels like, is centered around mostly the United States and some in other countries. When I can tell you, in a way that fits together what's going on somewhere else. Because remember, I live in the U.S. I'm not in those other countries, but I've got a lot of good sources around the world, and sometimes we'll mention the other ones. But the U.S. is not insignificant in world events right now for several reasons. And so even if you live in any other country, it really helps you to be informed, to know what's going on in the U.S., because the U.S. is targeted more than most places right now for destruction by the global cartel that is in charge of most things, including the U.S. media, elements of the U.S. government that are not loyal to the current leadership, all these different agencies, spy agencies and things that want to take down the U.S. government and the U.S. economy. And speaking of the economy, certainly the banking cartels. And we're aware, we had G. Edward Griffin on our Sunday show recently, just for the people that aren't up to date on what's happening with the central bank, which in the U.S. is called the Federal Reserve. And those banks are not just a place to store your money. They're totally not that at all. They print money and enter computer entries on the computer that are money out of nothing. They just create it. And then they charge interest by lending it out. I mean, if you were given that kind of a privilege in your company to make up money and lend it to people, lend this fake money to people, which is technically called fiat money, and charge interest on it, how much profit do you think you could make? Especially in 105 years since the central bank in the U.S. got started. It's one of the biggest scams in the world, and it's a big way to keep the populations under control, but also the governments under control. So the U.S. is being targeted for a very important place to destroy on the march toward world tyranny and consolidated dictatorship from a one-world government, which is very developed. It's been going on. It's built on work that's been going on in these cartels for literally thousands of years. And I know that's hard to imagine if you're not familiar with what they're doing, but I would say that, it's really too bad to have such concentrated, organized, focused evil in the world. But I guess we're here as a school, right? And we can't learn what our own capabilities are without some challenge to that. It's like when you're working out in the gym to get stronger, you have a weight that resists you, and the evil in the world resists us. And you can either lie down in front of it and just believe the corrupt media and figure you're helpless and can't do anything, which is exactly what they want you to do, because they have an agenda to complete while you're sleeping, hopefully. Or you can realize that waking yourself up is the main important thing to do, no matter what phase of your life you're in, and start working on that. And we have other programs that assist you in that if you happen to be interested. But this one in particular deals with what's going on in the outside world. And the U.S. is targeted also primarily because the founding documents of the United States, even though they were never completely honestly implemented, there were some pretty good ideals and structures on which to formulate government and the power structure in general. And what was so unusual about those documents, for example, the Declaration of Independence, was that they recognized that the rights that you have, not just as an American citizen, but as a human being, no matter where you're born, as a spiritual entity that you are, not physical, living in a physical body for the moment, all of your rights come with you when you get born. You don't have to sit around and wait for a government to give them to you, or you don't have to be born in the United States. You can be born in any other country, wherever you might be, or any country you could name, and you have exactly the same rights. So the founding documents in the U.S. recognize that. Probably the most important principle of the whole set of documents was that your rights belong to you. They're what's called unalienable, and the government can't take them away because the government didn't give them to you. It's good for the government to acknowledge that those are your rights, and governments in the world primarily exist to protect your individual rights, not the greater good group rights. That's a huge scam that's being played out in so many different ways, but your individual rights, you. And that means as long as you don't go out hurting other people intentionally, sometimes harm comes by mistake or unavoidably, but as long as you don't go out intending to hurt anybody and respecting their rights and their freedoms and their property, then you get to just live however you want. Total freedom within that caveat, which means you can think, say, believe, do, act out whatever you want. You can be completely crazy by other people's standards, and it doesn't matter. Even if you're the only person that lives like you live or believes what you believe, that's the smallest minority you can get, right? One person. And in the form of government that was instituted in the United States in the 1700s and could be copied or instituted anywhere else, says as a minority of one or any number that's small like that or big, your rights are completely protected, and doing that is the job and the duty and the role of the government. That's the purpose of it. That's why the global cartel really wants to destroy America as a country. And they have some ways that they're doing that right now, you might have noticed, and I'm going to review a few, but our time is so short, I'm just going to be able to touch on them. But that's why it's a target. The globalist rulers want it out of the way because they want world tyranny. And I'll just give you the bottom line really quick, although it took me decades to get to it. They're after not just control, not just surveillance, not just the Agenda 21 inventory, as Rosa Corey said it, of every item and person and being and plant and animal and everything on the planet, not just population reduction, They want complete extermination of life. And if you finally grasp that it's not just control, it's certainly not just money, because at the top level, that's not what they're after. It's not about money at the top. Once you grasp that, you start being able to understand that programs like geoengineering and not just GMOs, but the whole toxic agriculture system, which is a total insult to nature and humanity and was never needed for anything. And I'm not against farmers. I'm not against anybody. Even the worst of the bad people are victims from their own self-deception and are capable of being healed and woken up. And we actually could do that, which was the most important thing that I found in the work that I did. But all of these things, the toxic agriculture, the drug medicine, which is completely ridiculous. It's good for fixing you if you get run over by a car, putting you back together. There's some brilliant emergency doctors and trauma care people and backup personnel. They're doing superhuman work. But as far as health goes, they are not only out to lunch. I mean, it's way beyond that. It's at the controlling levels. It's just another parallel agenda to all these things I already mentioned, that they're not just making mistakes. They're there to do damage, and they're succeeding. It's not failing at its mission. And the same with fake education is succeeding, fake science is succeeding, engendering fear and division and race hatred and class warfare and gender warfare and everything. Those are all successful programs. But what they're successful in and what they lead to is not really something that you would like if they succeeded in getting to their end goal. So there's no point in learning about all these bad things happening in the world and how they're interconnected and everything, unless you then go a step further, a lot of steps further, and find out not only what the solutions are, but how you're not helpless. You can play a major role in the solutions because of who you really are, which is the biggest secret that the rulers want hidden right now. They use powerful tools such as fear, and they try to convince you from a very young age that fear is normal, it's natural, some people say it's even good for you. You know, you can't get away from an attacking lion or something unless you're terrified. Not true. Look at the fastest runners in the world going to track meets. They're fast enough to get away from anything that you could get away from, and they're not scared. They're just really pumped up with energy, and they're focused, and they're not scattered all over the place. So this myth that you have to be afraid, or even that you have to be angry, or that you have to be really upset and condemning the other bad groups that you see doing things against you, none of that's true. What's really true gets into self-healing and what you could actually do with it. And there's a consciousness that goes with that is pretty much beyond description until you start doing some of the preliminary work that leads to it. But the point that the global rulers are moving toward extermination of life on the planet, and obviously they're not trying to do it as fast as they can because they have the technology now to do it before tomorrow. So realize what that means. If they were going to do it all at once, there's nothing we could do to stop it. But they're not. And when you know, in the decades that I spent really analyzing it, to me, the top level rulers, which are way above the money level, are doing it as a ceremonial sacrifice, steps they have to pass, milestones, and notices that they have to give the public about each phase of what they're doing. So how all these things fit together, the microwave technologies and the 5G system, which is, as who was it, Fullerton and Former and others have said, it's a kill grid, and it is, but it does other things too, not just kill or nothing. It has all kinds of bad capabilities, and they've sold it to you as a convenience. And people will now fight for it, thinking that it is a convenience, and the global rulers think this is really funny. But that's what they try to do, is make us fight for our own suicide. And my suggestion is that we don't really want to do that. So on the way to that, and with the end in mind, on the way to the ultimate goal of destroying America as a free country, there are a lot of things they're doing to help that happen. One of the things is they want to convince everybody that nationalism is evil. And there's an emergence of nationalist leaders all over the planet right now, which the global rulers figure that they need to crush as quickly as possible. They're really irritated that people would try to be nationalists because they want to destroy individual countries. And one of the things that they're most irritated about is that the current president in the United States, who I won't name, hopefully, because as I said, I want to stay here with you on some of the major platforms for a while, not get kicked off right away. Anybody supporting the U.S. president by name is probably going to get kicked off social media. So I'll hopefully hold that off for a while. But he gave a speech recently at a rally, and he said, yeah, I'm a nationalist. This was wonderful, but he made a mistake in how he defined globalism, the opposite of nationalism. And he said, well, globalism is looking at what's good for the whole globe, but maybe not good for your individual country. That's not true, Mr. President. That's not true. And I don't think there was any bad intent on his giving the wrong definition, because it wasn't anything evil. It's just, it's not giving the full picture. And the full picture is that globalism has a goal not to do what's good for the globe. It's just the opposite. They want to enslave and destroy humanity and the whole biosphere. So little detailed point there to the president that this is quite different than what he said. However, it was really good that he defined himself as a globalist. And you know that it is good because the major media just jumped on him viciously and said, some of these guys were really playing like a role-playing game. Don Lemon on CNN, several others that he was in a panel with, they were saying, did you hear what the president just said? I can't believe it. He said he was a nationalist, like the new N-word, right? The most horrible thing he said, wow, I just can't believe he actually said that openly and exposed what he's doing. This is what that newscaster that I told you about was referring to as gaslighting. Just kind of like a con game, saying nationalism, everybody knows, is the most evil thing in the solar system, if not the whole galaxy. And he said, well, we're going to explain to you in case you don't understand why that's true. And actually, nationalism is, there's two different ways to define it. One is like the current president means it, which is that every country tries to take care of itself. This is like not what they call rocket science, right? If you are living in a country, and a country that defined by its borders, that has its own unique culture, way of doing things, its own belief systems, and should want the benefit of its people. I mean, almost every government around the country now is really corrupt and wants to use the people as victims, not to help them. But ideally, like the U.S. president is trying to describe, the leader of each country and the people in the government and the people in the corporations there, they should all be there to serve the population, not to steal from some and give the other ones stuff free. I don't mean that. That's called socialism or communism, and he wasn't talking about that. He's saying, see, every country is really rich because of its natural resources, and if those don't all get stolen by a central banking system and everything connected with that, global corporations that are trying to steal from everybody, if it's actually put together honestly with a free market where people can just use their own creativity and work and get prosperous and then help the people who can't work voluntarily, not by force from the government. And when there's prosperity, there's a lot of voluntary charity. It all works really well. And so the president of the U.S. was talking about really doing that, because then you get every country becoming strong and free and rich because the earth is rich, and they turn that into their own prosperity. And then they cooperate without giving up their own sovereignty and their own rights. That works really well. And the global rulers don't ever want anybody to understand that system, which is why they jump on the president for saying he's a nationalist. What they want you to think is that nationalism is what a certain dictator, that I may get banned for mentioning his name too, the famous one that everybody refers to in Germany, who started out in the 1930s in public, visibility, and rose to become probably the most famous dictator in history. Not the one who killed the most people, but the most famous, and the one who was the center around World War II events. And he actually rose to power with the help of U.S. corporations, U.S. banks. The Bush Sr.'s father was involved with the banks that supported him, and a lot of other U.S. corporations, notably IBM. And in fact, I think, and IG Farben, IBM helped him keep track of all those pesky prisoners in the concentration camps with special barcodes, because they didn't have implantable chips at that time, but they could print a barcode on somebody's wrist that would be indelible. And they did that. And IG Farben, the big company in Germany that made the nerve gas that killed the people in the camps, that corporation, which later turned out to become Bayer, which is in America and everywhere else now, those people supported that dictator and his ability to kill the people he did kill. Most of the ones he killed were Russians, actually, who were largely responsible for finally killing his efforts. But people from a lot of other countries died too, the U.S. and other places. And also the philosophy that he had way before. I've read his book, and he explains it in great detail. He was primarily a racist. That was even above nationalism. He thought that race was just like the most important thing there was. And it just so happened that the race that he focused on in Germany at the time, which he called the Aryan race, he said, oh, well, that happens to be the best race on the planet. So the function of a country, and this is how he used nationalism, is to support a race. Otherwise, why have a country? And so you have to try to get the people with the wrong races not to have kids, and the people with the right races to have lots of kids. There are other groups besides the Germans at that time that have followed this and are following it now. But that's what he was doing. And so his brand of nationalism was to 100% to support racism, which is the belief that his race was the best. And not only were they the best, but their mission in life was to go and take over all the other countries in the world, so that the world would be fantastic, and all the best race, the other races would just be kind of pushed out of the side. He didn't go into great detail on how he was going to exterminate them when he took over these other countries. But that was he made it clear that that was the goal. The other races could be allowed to live for a while if they promised not to procreate and that sort of thing. That was what he was in. That's what the corrupt media this week is trying to make you think that the U.S. president is doing, where he's coming from. It's a complete, subtle, calculated propaganda lie. And so they don't just lie and give you wrong information. They craft the presentation to make you believe a certain thing. And that's what they're all involved in. So it's pretty nasty, and I couldn't watch it very long on CNN and some other stations. I wanted to see what they're doing, and that's where this show was going on. Oh my gosh, he just said he's a nationalist. Wow. That he's also a capitalist, a constitutionalist. He believes in having borders on your country. Can you believe what a terrible person somehow got to be U.S. president? We all know he's a racist, which is absolutely the opposite of the truth. And I don't have time to go into everything about his personality. Certainly not perfect. He's got a lot of flaws, but his motive, the reason that he's one of the greatest presidents the U.S. has ever had is not that he gets everything right. It's why he's there. There specifically to sacrifice his own benefit to try to help the country when it's in danger of extinction. That's incredible. And it leads to other things. And the global rulers know very well, they've analyzed him from all directions. They know that's his motive. He knows he's quite intelligent and he's very generous from his past history. Way before he was involved in politics, he would get help by somebody after he was already rich and just go around and find out what they needed, pay off their house. I mean, he would buy golf clubs and other places that were excluding blacks and Jews and buy them and then open up to everybody after that. That's his personality. And he's very strong, obviously, and focused and self-confident, but not in a bad way. And the power structure knows that. That's why they hate him. That's why they want him dead. Even though he's making all these, he's making major mistakes, which we've called out, believing advisors which should not be believed that want war. Because, see, originally he was the only non-war, anti-war candidate out of the whole group of both parties. And now he's been pressured into some really terrible actions, like shooting missiles into Syria, which should never have been done. That was a war crime. So we're not just like pro one person no matter what they do, or against one person no matter what they do. If somebody from a different group that is generally destructive comes and does something great, we'll support that in a second. This is just, the motive is to find out what's true. So anyway, the bad dictator that we were mentioning in Germany, he was a socialist, not the opposite. He was a socialist. The name of his party was the National Socialist, and the abbreviation of that is the word that everybody uses, that they're calling everybody that now in America and everywhere else. If they tell the truth, oh, you must be, I don't know if the AI will kick us off for this, but it's 2 syllables, starts with N, it ends with I, it has a Z and an A in it. You probably can figure out the word I'm talking about. That's a socialist group, and they were out to take over and dominate the world. He certainly was not at the level of the current top-level global rulers who want to exterminate everybody, including themselves. And we go into the reasons of why they want to do that. It's beyond the comprehension of most people who can't imagine they'd want to kill themselves, but that's part of the agenda. Anyway, what that dictator did was totally against humanity, and it was based on racism. That was his primary belief, that there was one race that deserved to dominate everybody else. And he was very sincere, from what I can tell from his writings and his actions. He really believed in what he was doing, but he was really out of touch with some basic truths of existence. He didn't know that every human being is spirit, no matter what kind of a physical body they have. They're permanent, unlimited love, and we get wrapped up in the programming of mind, and it doesn't get expressed in a very good way sometimes, but eventually people do find out everybody is capable of being healed during this lifetime or some other time. We're all involved in the lessons, no matter what race we are, no matter what gender we are, whether we have a bunch of money in this lifetime or have no money and are just trying to survive. We've all got the same origin and essence. If that one thing were understood, we would never fall for this race division. We wouldn't have white racists and black racists and brown racists and yellow and red racists. We'd see that. That's a bad joke. You would never fall for it. Nobody's a racist who has any kind of consciousness at all. And eventually everybody figures that out. So because of how we're connected and what we really are, what we do to each other, we literally do to ourselves. That's not a philosophy or a belief system. Eventually you find out that's actually what's going on. And once you do understand that, you can't willingly hurt anyone other than maybe in self-defense. That's certainly fine, but you don't go out trying to kill other people for the sake of your religion, like there's a religion whose serious Orthodox followers are doing that all over the world, including in all over Europe and the UK and in the US. And that's a big religion that starts with the letter I, 5 letters. You can probably figure out what it is. Again, I don't want to get banned tonight. If I can help it, I'm of more use if I can talk to you and still be here. By the way, if we do get kicked off, or when we get kicked off, find us at Real Video, which is becoming Brighteon, BRIGHTEON.com, and we'll be there even if this platform disappears. But once you understand the basis of what's going on, love thy neighbor as thyself changes. Your understanding of that changes completely, because it's not based on religion, not based on philosophy. It's not based on reading, oh, I better do that because I'm commanded to do it. No, it's because you begin to get some awareness of who you are and who they are. And the reason you love them as yourself is because in another form they are yourself. And I know that may sound ridiculous, but under all the layers of illusion, it's really true. So what you do to or for anybody else comes back to you. If the rulers of countries understood this, and the current president has some understanding of this, you would never do anything of offensive violence or things like that, or think that your race is the only good race or any of that nonsense. Those are costumes. We're the same essence underneath that. So the ruler of Germany at that time went off on a tangent like any racist does, and it was all in the service of racism. And it's totally different than this other kind of racism that the media is against. And I told you about what the media is in our country and why they're not telling the truth. They're not a news service. They're the mouthpiece of corporations. Told you about, I've got a few notes here. I want to make sure I don't go off and forget things I want to cover in this brief little time. So what's going on right now, there's an election coming up in the United States, and I know it's just in the US, but it's significant for the entire world on a really deep level. And even though it's called a midterm election, that means the president's not getting voted on, but the people in Congress, and there's 2 houses in America, and they're all getting voted on, or some of them are getting voted on. And the global rulers have come to completely dominate the Democratic Party. They just had to choose one. They've corrupted most of the Republican Party already, but they're really using the Democratic Party like a demonic army to try to bring America back on the path of self-destruction. And because of the newscaster that I mentioned and several other really good ones all around the world, including individuals with cell phones that are going to the scene of events and videoing them and live streaming them. This is why the social media likes to cut off people's live streams. And they're just saying, excuse me, look, that's what's happening. No slant on it, no liberal or conservative agenda and explain it, nothing. Look, that's what's happening. And that's very valuable. And because of that, a lot of the social media censorship and twisting of things on the news is not working. And there's this approaching victory of what they call a red wave, or the Republican Party, which is not pristine in any way. It's a lot of the people in it are just completely out to lunch, or motivated by fear, or just wanting to get reelected. Some of them close to the president are complete traitors to the country. But the Democratic Party makes the Republican Party at the moment look great, which is kind of a sad commentary, because the Republican Party at the moment is a mess, and there's very few members of it that have any ethics. But the Democratic Party is in charge of making sure that the policies of the previous administration come back even more so. They want to destroy the borders so that the country gets flooded like the European countries. And the strategy is that will be the end of the country. And it'll be so much chaos and murder and rape and all these things coming up because of the type of people that they are bringing in. Not not real immigrants, okay? These are invaders. There's a big difference between people who come in illegally and ones who go through the vetting process and are going to contribute to the country and become members of that country, in this case, Americans, not hyphenated Americans, as Lloyd Marcus famously talked about, but just Americans coming in because they have something to contribute. There is what's called a caravan. It's kind of a funny name for it, but there's an invading army coming up toward the U.S. This is one of the most important news items from the last week and previous too that I wanted to make sure to get to, because this is like if a foreign country declared war on America and sent a massive army in to physically invade, what they call boots on the ground. That's what's happening right now. And this particular wave of invaders started primarily in Honduras and Guatemala, and the idea was to come up through Mexico and just flood into the U.S. and be handed voting privileges by the Democratic Party as soon as they came in, be handed welfare, and the news media, which is completely criminal and complicit in all this stuff, would say, oh, look, there's women and children who are fleeing in terror from their country. They need asylum, obviously, and they originally said there were about 200 of those that were going to try to get up through Mexico to the U.S. They forgot to say that that journey going on foot from Honduras to the U.S. it's not feasible for almost anybody. The distance alone would preclude almost any of us from ever considering or making it. But it's full of really nasty people all the way from Honduras up to the U.S. border. And the coyotes, that's the truckers who bring human cargo in exchange for a bunch of money. And the people who can't pay the increasing rates that they charge, they just murder and rape them. And about 80% of the women they bring up are raped. It's really a mess. And they could never have organized an invading army of 50, 100,000, 200,000 people. It's about 20,000 that are coming now in the first wave. And they could never have done that. Those people can't afford anything. They couldn't even pay the coyotes. So these foundations, including primarily the ones controlled by Soros, have gotten together with the United Nations, which is another completely criminal organization. Just horrible. They should never have been allowed to establish a presence on U.S. soil or anywhere else, really. They were sold under the idea of this wonderful cooperation between countries. It has nothing to do with that. Maybe sometime we'll get into the details of the programs they really do. And most of the workers in the UN believe it's good and that they're serving the world and they're good people. But at the top, they're, for example, organizing and helping to pay for the mass invasion that's now on its way up through Mexico. And they wanted to get there before this midterm election that we've been talking about, because they're about 85, 90% military-age men who are coming in like an army, but they've got enough women and children with them to put in the front like their shield, so that when they get up near the border, the media will be there to film all of them getting to the border. And even though it takes like 4 to 6 months to walk, they're going to show up there probably right on time, just before the elections. And then the U.S. president, who wants to protect the border and knows that's his mandate, his job, he is to make sure that nobody gets into the country illegally. That's a presidential constitutional duty. In all the border states, he has to do that. Even though California, with its insane governor and legislature, has vowed to resist it and not cooperate, and the Democrats want to get rid of the border and the Border Patrol and ICE. In fact, there was chanting going on earlier. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget what they said. Oh, shoot, I don't know where I put it. Oh, here it is. The chant that they were doing on television was, "No borders, no wall, no USA at all." This is Antifa, the communist group, the Democratic supporters. That's what they're after. And so the strategy is make sure these people get there on time. So they're paying for huge flatbed trucks, a whole fleet of them, to pick up the people walking now that they've filmed them all as walking, poor victims running away from countries and stuff. Now they pick them up, put them on trucks. They're trucking them up to the border right this minute, even though the U.S. media doesn't really want to focus on that, obviously. And when they get there, they're playing a chess game with the president, who's going to try to do his duty. Unfortunately, the border wall, which should have been built decades ago, is not there because of resistance within the Republicans and the Democrats. And he's going to be faced with a physically non-secure border, tens of thousands of invaders coming up, intending to just walk right across it. The media portraying the invaders as poor children primarily, and the president is so evil. He's already been portrayed that way on Time magazine and all the other New York Times and all the major ones, CNN, etc. And they're going to try to make a disaster happen. If the military won't start shooting the invaders, including the women and children, hopefully for the TV presence, then most likely they'll bring in their own shooters and dress them up as supporters of the president or military and start shooting their own invaders to make their point and hopefully get everybody to vote against Republicans in the upcoming midterm election. And I would expect to see that happen in many events in the next 10 days. It's only 10 days till those elections. So the Democrats and the Soros and other foundation-funded entities in the UN have a lot to do in the next 10 days. And I suspect because the public is really supporting and seeing the existing administration and seeing through a lot of this fake news, they're going to resort to violence. And what I heard just in getting ready for the show today is that there was a shooting, I think it was today, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At first they thought they had killed 8 people, but now it looks like 12 people, maybe more by now, that had died. I mean, that had actually been killed. And I would expect more of this. There may be, this is what they call false flags. They're violent incidents that are created by the people who want to appear to be the victims, because there's no reason that the party, the Republican Party, which is about to win the midterms, would go and ruin their own image and organize this. This has to be organized by the party that is worried about losing and needs to discredit the current president and everybody in his party right away. So I would expect more shootings, unfortunately, and maybe bombs of different kinds, attacks on media headquarters, stuff like that. That's what is probably getting ready to happen. It's probably already organized because, you know, there's only 10 days till this election, and they need to get in there, at least in the House, and bring impeachment against this president right away and portray him as a racist, a sexist, a Nazi, a nationalist in the worst way. This is all fake stuff. It's not true at all. But that they know that there's millions of people watching television that actually believe that what's on TV, because they can't imagine that the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, all the MSNBC, Media Matters, all these media companies and government agency spokesmen, including a lot of Republican ones, are all in collusion and totally corrupt and evil. They can't believe that, because if they believe that, their worldview, which gives them a sense of security, starts to fall apart. And I totally empathize with that. Anyway, this is building up to be some kind of a really major event at the border. And the media is not talking too much about it right now, but you've got the typical unstoppable force and immovable object coming together, which you don't get to see that too often. That's getting ready to happen probably right before the election. And all of the news media already has their scripts and say, this is proof that the current president only wants to kill women and children. That's his whole goal. He hates immigrants, even though he's married to one, and doesn't hate anybody like that. He's a total warmonger. He's unstable. He might do anything at any time, and that's why he has to be removed from office. The media is ready, and all they have to do is get the 20,000 or so people to the border right before the election, and if possible, they're mobilizing other groups that will raise it to bigger numbers. And the media and the Democrats are saying letting all these people in is compassion, even though it's completely ridiculous suicide. They want the gullible public that's brainwashed to believe this is compassion. But this is an invasion force. It's a military attack. And what happens at the border is going to determine not only a lot of the fate of the U.S., but if they can bring down the U.S., then it gives them more confidence to bring down the remaining resistance in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, all these places where populist nationalist leaders are coming they're emerging into view now, and the power structure is desperate to make sure that they don't go any further. So the mainstream media is working to educate people. The universities are trying to completely brainwash the kids and turn them into socialists and communists, and have sympathy for Antifa, which is running around beating people up in the name of fighting fascism. Anybody with any consciousness would realize that's completely ridiculous. They are the danger, not the people they're supposedly protesting. Anyway, the newspapers and the mainstream media, the TV channels, they're all trying to make people carry out their own national suicide and world suicide by doing this in every country. And at the same time, to add to the probability of national destruction, the central bank, which is euphemistically called the Federal Reserve in America, even though it's not federal, it's not part of the government, it's above the law, it's mostly foreign owned, it's completely evil. And it is giving out fake money that's based on nothing and then charging interest on it, which is designed to destroy any economy that's in. They're doing the same thing in almost every other major country now. And they have been systematically raising interest rates over and over and over and over and over again since the current president got in, to try to show that the economy is crashing, which they can do. They did it in 1929 in the U.S., and they've done it to a lesser degree in other times. They want to do it now. They've had like 7 successive interest rate hikes, and this puts a block on expanding business and prosperity. Not that all the businesses that the president supports should be supported. He really has a huge blind spot, which is very damaging, potentially lethal, in supporting companies that have a toxic product, notably all the companies involved in the Internet of Things, the 5G deployment, which they're really all excited about, which, by the way, Elon Musk, who a lot of people think is this great, brilliant person, intellectually he's brilliant, but he's really not brilliant, thinking that we need satellites all over the earth, above every part of the earth, making it so that nobody can escape from this deadly 5G radiation. And I'm not saying that as just a belief, that it's bad. I've done the research and you can find out all about it. It's something that should be blocked. Like right now, it's already gone too far, and then the previous Gs should be taken down too. The current president in the U.S. appears to know nothing about that, and he's supporting companies that will bring out this that will hurt him and his own family and everybody else. But there are populist leaders, nationalist leaders that could lead to wonderful things in the world emerging everywhere. Tommy Robinson, notably in the UK, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, who was almost killed by this crazy person in a crowd, probably sent by the power structure to make sure that nobody like the current U.S. president would arise in Brazil. He's in favor of something like the Second Amendment. He understands that firearms rights don't spread violence. They spread security and harmony in society more than disarming all the people and making them subject to criminals, like is happening in many major cities and countries around the world right now. There are also brave dissidents arising in even China. That takes a lot of courage considering what their government does to you if you criticize the government. And they're working on their social score system where they'll mark you down for having the wrong opinions, and you can't travel or have a job or eat food or things like that. That's being prepared to come to America. So it's critical that the current momentum towards positive nationalism, individualism, prosperity, hopefully the current president will also get rid of the Federal Reserve. It needs to be abolished in every country. And this is happening against the all-out effort to demonize the good things that are happening. I mean, all-out effort. They're using witches to put curses on the current president. It's just pretty amazing. The Mexican president, who's totally corrupt, is saying that he'll use this invasion force and the drug cartels against America. And he's already working on that. And, of course, all the major media. But their biggest fear is still one thing, and that's you. And their biggest effort is to make sure that you never become aware of who you actually are. You're supposed to believe that you're one out of so many people, that you're insignificant as an individual, that you need experts to control your life, that you could never stop these huge forces of history. After my research that started in the 1960s, I believe that's opposite to the truth. And that if you find out who you are, the whole negative game is over. And I encourage you to do that on your own, however you want to do it. But don't believe what you're told about how limited and helpless you are. Find out the forbidden information on natural health, which can eliminate most of aging. Get your health and immunity back. Don't take the injections that just are the most ridiculous way to get immunity you can imagine and aren't true and cause disease and all kinds of things. Get your health back without the drugs and injections and all that. Get your consciousness back. Realize why we're all connected and why that gives you massive power to actually change the fate of the world. I'm not exaggerating. That's why we're talking. That's why you're here. So anyway, I want to tell Planetary Healing Club members, the meeting starts in half an hour. Anybody who wants to find out what that is and maybe get involved, lostartsradio.com/club. Otherwise, there's a Sunday show that's free and public tomorrow night. It's going to be incredible as usual. That's our guest show. And free videos during the week. Watch for those on our channels. If we get kicked off other channels, find us at brighteon.com. I hope you have a great week. I'm really grateful that you spent a little time with us. And we're going to give you an update on all these things at our next meeting in 1 week from now. Talk to you then.